back to the Franchetta show. So far we've learned about why they sailed to the Gold Coast, the arrival, the building of the Elmina Castle to this day, which stands, right? And we've learned about the benefit that the gold was able to afford the Portuguese. With the gold, they were able to succeed in their exploits in the regions of Morocco that they had their sights on. They were able to conquer those lands and add it to their territories. Now, to understand the psychology of the Portuguese, they were very, very reserved in their approach. They came up with the saying, "I cannot come and kill myself." They wouldn't, do too much in a region. They will commit the least possible to gain the most out of any territory that they were on, and they will also give gifts to noblemen and the chiefs to court their interest, to allow them to continue to enjoy the profitable trade in their regions. Just like they suspected, other Europeans came sailing. The Dutch came, the English came, and competition arose in the trade of gold. This competition didn't favor the Portuguese because they weren't producing most of the goods that they sold or traded with the locals for the gold. They bought them in markets in Europe, especially Spain. But the other countries like the Dutch and the English, they produce their goods, so they were able to set those prices lower than the Portuguese could. This attracted most of the locals to trade with the other Europeans, and the Portuguese didn't like that. They were salty, they were angry, so they will retaliate by punishing the locals who did that. How do they do it? They will usually align themselves with the enemies of the locals that traded with the other Europeans, and then attack their villages, burn them and stuff like that. That's how the Portuguese dealt with their losing to the other European countries who were able to set more favorable prices. But favorable prices always pushes traders. So despite the punishment or the attacks by the Portuguese, the locals will still flock to the English and the Dutch. And this started the decline of the Portuguese influence in the Gold Coast, because they also felt hard done by that the Portuguese were treating them this way, right? So the Portuguese relied heavily on the locals who were the local soldiers. They relied on them to protect their trading interest in their territory. They needed that manpower. And now those locals were turning against the Portuguese because the Portuguese were treating them unfairly. And that was the issue. Also, they needed the local soldiers to man their forts and castles that they had spread out in the Gold Coast. So the Dutch, they were the first to smell a chance, an opportunity to, zero in on the Portuguese. Now the locals were favoring the Dutch and fighting with them against the Portuguese. The Dutch started attacking the Elmina Castle, attacking the Portuguese to break their resolve. In their first series of attempts, they failed, but later on in 1596, the Dutch succeeded in ousting or capturing the Elmina Castle, sacking the castle and ousting the Portuguese. And the Portuguese, like I said, they cannot come and kill themselves. They focused their attention in regions around Angola and Mozambique, and also in the Americas. Later on in the 17th century, most of the trade done in that region was centered on slaves. The Portuguese in those early periods did not want to disrupt their gold trade with the wars that was necessary to capture the slaves, but they will rather hold them in their castles that they had, in the coast, especially the Elmina Castle. That was it, because the Portuguese, they could not come and kill themselves, right? Now I'm going to focus more about the influence that the Portuguese had on the local people in our culture. And we still have evidence of their culture to this day, especially in the words that we use in our local dialects, in our local languages. There are many words that are actually Portuguese. We think that they're part of our language, that we originated those words, but we didn't. They are either borrowed Portuguese words or a corrupted form of Portuguese words. So during that time, because the Portuguese were the first Europeans that we interacted with and traded with, there were many local intermediaries that spoke fluent Portuguese. And the Portuguese, as well as later on their successors, the Dutch and the British, relied on these local intermediaries to offer translation services with the other parties and during trading, right? So what are some of the words that we have to this day that are actually Portuguese? Allow me to blow your mind. So in our local language, we have the word for bread is pano, pano for bread. And the Portuguese say pão, pão or pem, and that is where we got the word pano from. The next word is abolo, abolo or abodo. That is the word for cake, right? And the Portuguese say bolo, bolo. So in the Bible, we have this translation, local translation, about when Jesus said that I am the bread that came from heaven, that a man may eat and live forever, right? That in our local translation we have abolo. So literally we are saying Jesus is the cake that came from heaven. That's the song abolo, wala bolo Jesus, right? So our bread is Jesus, or our cake is Jesus, right? Now the word for cheese, we say queijo, queijo, and the Portuguese say queijo, queijo. Now, in fishing, we have tilapia. Tilapia is just pure Portuguese, right? And barracuda. Barracuda, if you're a fisherman, it also means, it's also from Portuguese. Now, for grupa, the Portuguese name is garupa, and it's a type of fish. Now, for coffee, we say café or café, and the Portuguese say café, right? Now, for this phrase, the bill, or a calculation, right? For in trading, by all means, you're going to demand for a bill. Now, locally, we say a conta. A conta could be, the calculation or the bill. And the Portuguese say a conta for the bill. Now, for key, we say safe or safe, right? And the Portuguese say chave for key. Now, the word for fork, we say garfo or garfolo, right? And the Portuguese say garfo for fork. And the one who put this together is called Marco Aurelio Chamorro. He's a professor and he put this list together. I think he's Brazilian, right? Yeah. And thanks to him, we have this list. He said it was funny for him to realize that the Evers and Fanti say faca for fork, but in Portuguese, it actually means knife. They say faca for knife, right? And we say it for fork. So if you hear someone saying faca for knife, for fork, it actually means knife in Portuguese. Now, this popular one for oven, we say forno or flono, and the Portuguese say forno for knife. Now, the word for copper, we say acoble or cobre, and the Portuguese say cobre for copper, right? So if you say something like this in our local language, abolo no eshe fono, Portuguese, I think, can understand that you're talking about baking bread or cake, right? And now the word for nails, like the hammer and nails, the word for nails, till this day we say plego or prego or prego, right? And the Portuguese say, guess what? Prego. Maybe they roll their tongues, there are more, so they will say prego, right? So the word for cup, we say copo, copo. The Portuguese say copo, and this refers to glass cups, right? Now the word for shoe, we say aspatre. Aspatre is very common, especially if you learned gan or fanti. You hear aspatre, and the Portuguese say sapato, sapato for shoes. Now another popular one is dash me. We say dash me. In Ghana, it's a slang for give me or gift me something. So if I want you to give me or gift me something, I'll say, oh, dash me the shirt, dash me your spoon, dash me the phone, you know. And I thought we got it from the English, but you know, in English, dash is maybe to run or dash something against the wall or something like that, right? So I was confused, but I realized that we actually got it from Portuguese, which is das me, and it's a conjugation for when you are giving something to someone. So if I want you to give me something in Portuguese, I'll say das me, right? And that's where we get dash me from. Now the word for onion, we say cebola or cebulai, right? And the Portuguese say cebola for onions. Now the word for a word or chat or an issue or a matter or a problem, right? In our local slang, we say palava, right? We say palava for that, and we got it from the Portuguese, which we got it from the Portuguese. And the Portuguese say palavra, right? Palavra for a word. So, the popular market in Accra, in the city of Accra, is tudo, and it was started by some Portuguese merchants as well. And later on they left it for the Lebanese, and now it's mostly occupied by Ghanaian traders. And tudo means all or everything, right, in Portuguese. So tudo, everybody shops at tudo. It's Portuguese. Tudo bem, right? So these are some of the words that we still use in our local languages today that are actually Portuguese. There are people from Ghana who bear the last name Alfonso and names like that, and all of this was inherited from the Portuguese. So this brings us to the end of Portugal versus Ghana. I hope Ghana beats Portugal. Let me predict. It's gonna be 3-2 in favor of Ghana. Go Black Stars. If you doubt, hey, we'll see how it goes. And my favorite Portuguese player, Bernardo Silva, I like him. This guy moves like La Caravella. He moves like La Caravella. He's a very good dribbler. And I also admire João Cancelo a lot. But, you know, the legend, Cristiano Ronaldo. We hope to meet you guys again, and hopefully we'll beat you. This brings us to the end, right? I forgot to add this. The Portuguese were making trips a lot to the Americas and to the regions in Africa. They brought a lot of the good crops from the Americas to most of their territories in Africa. Things like tomatoes, a lot of crops like sugarcane, or what do you call it, like cassava, plantains, bananas. Most of these things we got them from the Americas. In our local languages, we refer to the local version of the crops that we got from, you know, the Americas. We refer to ours as wild, right? Like the ones in the forest. So we have the forest type of yam, we have the forest type of plantain or banana, but the ones that we eat a lot to this day are the ones that we got from the Americas, thanks to the Portuguese and thanks to the other Europeans. So this has improved our diets a lot, right? And even the cocoa were also brought to Fernando Po by the Portuguese. So this is something that we enjoyed because of the contacts we had with the Portuguese. And even the corn, some corn as well. Some of the countries that Portugal colonized include Angola, Mozambique, Sao Tome and Principe, Cape Verde, and many islands in the Gulf of Guinea were all, formerly colonized by the Portuguese. You can follow me on all social media platforms as Come Get Frank or Come G Frank, and I hope you enjoyed this. I'm sure you did. Just smash the like button and hit subscribe. I'm going to be posting more content in relation to cultures from Ghana and relate them with cultures and history from around the world. So catch you in another episode of the Frank Shitta Show.